He knew my ex's last name before I ever said it. In the car, Zoe sat beside Giorgio, still shaking from the elevator, still trying to understand why everyone feared him. Then he said Bastien Lefras' name. Not just Bastien. The full name. The name Zoe had never spoken. That was the moment her fear changed shape, because this was to random rescue. Giorgio Castellaneta had known exactly who she was long before she ran into his arms. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Picture Lena, a fragile silhouette in an unforgiving hotel lobby. She only wanted to deliver an old manuscript and retreat to her quiet life. But fate is a cruel director. Instead of peace, she finds her abusive ex standing right in her path. Panicking, she backs into the steel cage of an elevator, begging the tall shadow inside for salvation. Enter Vittorio. The lighting shifts. This man is no savior. He is an apex predator. His heavy hand immediately clamps onto her waist, locking her in place. His dark eyes lock onto the ex, already sizing up a coffin for the boy. The ultimate trap snaps shut. It is a harsh reality we all must learn eventually. Sometimes the hand reaching out to pull you from the fire is just a much darker monster, claiming you for himself. The ex shrinks back into the lobby, recognizing the silent, deadly violence rolling off Vittorio. Lena lets out a breathy, nervous laugh, desperately trying to break the heavy tension. But Vittorio remains still as stone. The brass doors slide shut with a final thud, and his firm grip on her waist does not loosen a single fraction. Later, watching the hotel staff tremble in terror just speaking to him, the freezing truth hits her. She just traded a pathetic bully for a lethal captor. Her mind fractures, spinning back to the quiet safety of her morning routine, where she had perfectly timed her daily bakery visit, down to the minute. It reveals something painfully true about trauma. We obsessively control the tiny details of our lives, purely to block out the massive, terrifying forces we know we cannot fight. Let the camera linger on her morning for a moment. Lena anchors her fragile existence to the most boring routines imaginable. The old man in the gray apron, the heavy smell of baking bread, the heat of a cheap coffee cup. These are the tiny life rafts keeping her from drowning in panic. Constantly, her fingers push a pair of taped, broken glasses up her nose. They are a painful souvenir from a brutal winter back in Philadelphia. She wears those crooked frames like a shield, a silent warning to the world that she is broken goods, far too damaged to bother with. But here is the tragic flaw in wearing your scars on the outside. When you spend years convincing yourself that you are worthless, you completely forget how to fight back the moment a real predator steps out of the dark and decides you belong to him. She calls her miserable apartment a discreet palace. In reality, it is a freezing fourth-floor walk-up. The thin glass rattles against the biting wind, and muffled piano chords bleed through the cheap walls all day. She romanticizes this lonely box because it provides the ultimate illusion of safety. Nobody knows where she sleeps. She crosses the Gregory city streets, stepping into a dusty, rare bookshop to face her boss, Madame Aurélie. Lena has constructed a life totally stripped of human warmth, trading affection for cold predictability. It teaches us a deeply heartbreaking lesson. Far too often, a wounded person will gladly lock themselves inside a freezing empty room, simply to avoid the terrifying risk of letting someone new break their heart all over again. Her boss is a deeply intimidating woman with sharp white hair, just another force casually stepping on our protagonist. She calls her Zoe, a fragile fake name Lena uses to sever the cord to her past. Madame Aurélie tosses a leather folder across the desk, openly mocking her quiet nature. Lena simply takes the hit, offering a hollow joke in return. Her self-worth died the day she locked herself in that attic. The assignment is a hand delivery to a wealthy buyer at the Plaza Hotel. The camera pushes in as sheer panic washes over Lena. She sucks in a trembling breath, eyes going wide with absolute terror. It is a stark reminder that deep trauma never cares about logic. Sometimes, just hearing the name of a glamorous building is enough to make a survivor feel like they are fighting for their life. Watch how her anxiety spirals into a crushing panic. To a broken woman surviving on pennies, a luxury hotel feels like a heavily armed fortress. Yet a spark of stubborn pride kicks in. She pastes on a brave face, promising to finish the job before lunch. Madame Aurelie hands over cab fare with a nasty warning to eat something. Because a place like that will swallow a hungry girl whole. Lena takes the cruel jab, like a needle between the ribs. She forces her trembling mind away from the fear, focusing entirely on the soft velvet folder and her white cotton gloves. It highlights a powerful defense mechanism. When we are truly terrified, we obsess over the small tasks in front of us, desperately hoping the busy work will drown out the roaring fear inside our heads. Notice how obsessively she prepares for this simple trip. She straightens the old pages with manic precision, trapped in the tragic delusion that organizing a folder will somehow protect her from a violent world. It is only when the taxi forces her to sit still that her buried memories claw to the surface. Dark thoughts of Bastien, her former French fiancé, flood her mind. He is the monster she ran from, the reason she fled across an ocean. Growing up as the son of a powerful lawyer, Bastien was poisoned by endless money and influence. He believed he could consume whatever he wanted, without paying a toll. It is a chilling reminder about human darkness. True villains rarely wear monstrous masks. They usually just look like perfectly dressed men who have never been told no in their entire lives. Bastien was a masterclass in breaking a human spirit. He thrived on public humiliation, casually listing her flaws while pouring wine at elegant dinners. He dismantled her world piece by piece, auditing her phone and systematically chasing away her friends. When she finally found the courage to leave, he did not rage. He just laughed, absolutely certain she was a possession that belonged to him forever. The echo of that laugh forced her to sleep, with the lights on for 10 straight years. The cab jolts to a stop at the massive stone steps of the plaza. She pushes up her broken glasses, clutching the folder to her chest like a paper shield, and walks blindly into the jaws of a trap. It is a bitter lesson about survival. Escaping the demons of your past is never as simple as just changing your city. Stepping into the lobby, Lena does not see luxury. She sees a lit battlefield. The marble floors amplify every click of her worn heels, making her feel exposed, like a rabbit in an open meadow. The heavy scent of jasmine makes her stomach turn. She prays to drop the package and vanish. But the second the clerk coldly tells her to wait, her reality shatters. Before she even turns her head, the sound hits her like a physical blow. A deep, arrogant laugh rolling from the hallway. Bastien. Her abuser is standing right there, casually sipping a drink. The impossible bad luck of the moment short-circuits her terrified brain. It is a brutally cold reminder about fate. The universe does not care about mathematical odds. When the time comes, your deepest nightmares will always track you down. Stick with me here. You and I are about to witness true terror.
Lena freezes completely.
She watches Bastien looking comfortably relaxed, which makes the violent chaos exploding in her mind feel 100 times worse. The grand lobby suddenly warps, feeling like a rapidly shrinking box. He is barely 20 meters away. If he turns his head even a fraction, she is dead. She silently prays the mahogany desk will just split open and swallow her. She stops breathing entirely, locked in the exact paralyzing freeze a deer suffers before the wolf strikes. The clerk is still speaking, but the words are drowned out by the deafening alarms ringing in her ears. It proves a terrifying point about trauma. Sometimes the most inescapable prison in the world is just the space inside your own frozen body. Words mean nothing to her now. Her brain flips a primal survival switch, turning her into a hunted animal mapping out an escape route. Her eyes frantically scan the room for a hidden stairwell, quickly locking onto a hallway with 3 mirrored elevators. It is deeply heartbreaking to see how efficiently abused persons acutely escape angles in the blink of an eye. She mumbles a hollow thank you to the clerk and moves. Every instinct screams at her to let her run, but she knows sprinting will only trigger the predator to chase. She slips into the furthest elevator, violently smashing the button, clutching her velvet folder, clutching her velvet fold like it could actually stop a bullet. Extreme fear has a twisted, tragic way of forging brilliant survival experts out of totally ordinary people. In her panicked mind, Bastion's laugh bounces violently off the walls, creeping closer by the second. She silently screams at the elevator doors to close. But these luxury doors are designed to slide shut at a painfully slow, elegant pace. The delay is pure torture. Hanging in that agonizing wait, her eyes catch a towering shadow in the mirror. A massive man in a sharp, dark suit is standing perfectly still behind her. She had been so focused on the monster outside that she never noticed the silent phantom stepping in with her. Her blood runs entirely cold. The devil she knows is out in the lobby, but an absolute mystery is locked inside this tiny metal box with her. It is a chilling reminder of our vulnerability. Sometimes the quiet unknown lurking behind you is far deadlier than the threat you can see. Her mind processes this stranger in blurry snapshots. The violent cut of his jawline, the heavy watch on his wrist. The most terrifying detail is the suffocating silence he brings into the space. And the doors are still open. Lena loses whatever shred of rational thought she had left. When you sleep with the lights on for 10 years, you do not have the luxury of thinking clearly. Her shattered nerves make a desperate choice. She will use this massive man as a human shield, praying a public scene keeps Bastion from dragging her back to hell. She throws herself backward, slamming hard into the solid chest of the unknown stranger. Her folder drops to the floor as she begs for her life in a broken whisper. It is a tragic truth about desperation. Absolute terror will always make us trade basic logic for the slimmest chance at survival. The camera tracks Zoe's frantic sprint down the dimly lit corridor, her breath tearing through the silence. She crashes into the monolithic frame of Giorgio, using him as a desperate prop to escape the encroaching shadow of Bastion. In a blind panic, she plants a clumsy, trembling kiss along his sharp jawline just as the brass elevator doors slide open. She expects him to shove her away. Instead, his massive, calloused hand clamps onto her waist, snapping shut like a steel trap. The metallic click of the doors echoes her horrifying realization. The trap is sprung. The chilling irony of the human condition is that in our frantic scramble to escape a wolf, we often throw ourselves willingly into the jaws of the lion. Watch the effortless brutality of his response. Giorgio does not flinch. He fluidly slides his arm around her trembling shoulders, dropping his chin to her temple with the terrifying intimacy of a decade-long romance. A low, liquid murmur of Italian slips from his lips. Zoe does not know the words, but the cadence is unmistakable. It is the quiet, bone-chilling frequency of a man who orchestrates funerals before his morning coffee. Out in the harsh hallway light, Bastion freezes. The predatory swagger drains from his posture as his eyes lock onto the apex predator claiming his prey. It is a harsh truth we must all face eventually. No matter how fierce the neighborhood bully pretends to be, the true monsters of this world operate in absolute silence. Let us step into that confined space together and watch the air turn to lead. Bastion throws his hands up in a hollow, trembling surrender, plastering on a pathetic smile as he backs away from a violence he could never comprehend. The heavy brass doors glide shut with a final, sealing click. Bastion is gone, but the true nightmare now breathes right beside her. Zoe stands paralyzed, her heartbeat thrashing against her ribs like a dying bird against a window pane. The silence in the elevator is thick, suffocating, saturated with the dark, heavy scent of aged leather and imported sandalwood. She sought a shield, but found a cage. It is a chilling truth for us all. The walls we hastily build to keep the danger out are often the exact same walls that lock us in. The sheer weight of the moment shatters her composure entirely. Under the harsh overhead light, her nervous system short-circuits into a frantic, breathless laughter. She begins to babble in a chaotic blend of 3 languages, the desperate, high-pitched chatter of a soul quietly collapsing inward. But when she finally gathers the nerve to step back, she hits a wall of tailored wool and solid muscle. Giorgio does not tighten his grip. He does not resort to vulgar force. He simply remains utterly immovable, projecting the chilling, absolute stillness of a deity who has already written her fate. Life teaches us this painful lesson, time and time again. The most terrifying form of control is never a raised voice, but a quiet, unbreakable silence. The spinning stops, leaving her to finally look upon her captor. The camera lingers on her hyper-focused survival instinct as she catalogs the man holding her hostage. He is in his 30s, carved from stone, with a faint scar whispering of a deeply violent past. His eyes are hollow voids devoid of all warmth. Then, the wardrobe. A bespoke dark wool suit, finished with a heavy silk family crest, embroidered upon the cuff, a detail she absorbs, only because his hand remains an iron shackle upon her hip. He speaks in pristine English, asking her name with a soft, polite tone completely devoid of human empathy. We must remember that true darkness rarely wears a monstrous face. It is usually impeccably dressed, hiding its devastating nature in plain sight. Her voice trembles just once before she forces it steady, offering only her first name, Zoe. When he waits in silence for the rest, she bites her tongue. It is a fragile, useless rebellion. Notice the subtle shift in his posture. He simply tilts his head, a gesture mimicking respect, but actually functioning as a cold, clinical measurement of her breaking point. Then, with agonizing slowness, he peels his hand away from her waist, psychological masterclass proving he dictates when she is allowed to breathe. The elevator chimes. The doors reveal a hulking guard bearing the same crest, flanked by a trembling hotel manager. It is a bitter pill we all must swallow. Small acts of defiance mean nothing when the entire board is already rigged against you. The frame widens to capture a world bending its knee. The hotel manager turns the color of ash, the blood vanishing from his cheeks the instant his eyes meet the predator. He stammers through pathetic, disjointed apologies, his hands trembling violently as he breathes the title, Don Castellaneta. Down the long corridor, a room service attendant abandons a silver cart and sprints for the fire exit. Even the polished receptionist hits a silent alarm. The sheer, vibrating dread radiating off these ordinary people is the hammer that shatters Zoe's denial. The terror of the crowd paints the true portrait of her nightmare. It is a haunting truth of survival. Sometimes the raw fear in the eyes of strangers tells us far more about our own doom than our intuition ever could. The tragedy locks into place, striking her with the force of a derailing train. She is merely an academic, yet the cultural markers are impossible to ignore. The name Castellaneta, the ancient title of Don, the deep, blood-soaked roots of Sicilian syndicate royalty. Suddenly, her velvet folder of priceless historical manuscripts feels absurdly trivial against the looming shadow of a shallow grave. Her voice breaks as she offers a pathetic whisper, begging to leave. Meanwhile, the towering enforcer drops to one knee, gathering her scattered papers with a delicate, chilling precision. It is profoundly disturbing to watch a bone breaker handle parchment like spun glass. We quickly learn that the things we treasure most become utterly worthless the moment our breath is threatened. Observe the devastating arrogance of absolute power. He does not even blink at her plea to escape. It is as if the wind spoke. Instead, he projects his voice down the hall, commanding the entire floor to be emptied, and seizing a private suite as though he owns the very oxygen in the building. Without a downward glance, he instructs his enforcer, Vincenzo, to take her velvet folder. Vincenzo claims her life's work with the dead-eyed, mechanical efficiency of an assassin, loading a magazine. He cares nothing for her passion, only for securing an asset. And just like that, her identity is stolen. It is a deeply unsettling reality that those with true, terrifying authority never need to raise a hand to ruin you. They simply command the tide, and the water obeys. You and I have watched this tragic dance before, the desperate thrashing of a trapped soul. My heart aches for her as she scrambles for an invisible exit. She weaves a painfully obvious web of lies about strict bosses and misplaced deliveries, desperately clawing at the fading ghost of her normal life. She pulls on the brittle armor of a tough city girl, projecting a hollow bravery while her spirit shatters inside. In a final, agonizing plea, She offers to simply evaporate. She promises to take the service stairs, to erase his face from her memory, to vanish from his universe entirely. It is a universal human tragedy. When back to the edge of the cliff, we try to negotiate with the hurricane, forgetting that the storm has absolutely no interest in our rules. He allows her to exhaust herself against the unyielding stone of his silence. He stands perfectly still, absorbing her frantic lies with the chilling patience of a predator, letting its prey tire out before the fatal strike. When her breath finally hitches, he locks his dead eyes onto hers. She tries to build a shield of logic, arguing that the pathetic stalker downstairs poses no real threat to his empire, but Giorgio effortlessly takes her naive worldview and crushes it to dust. He recites the timeline of her doom with mechanical precision. 2 hours to extract her name, 4 hours to map out every detail of her existence. It is a devastating lesson to learn. Our clever logic and careful plans mean absolutely nothing when standing before someone who owns the entire board. He tightens the psychological vice, bleeding the hope right out of the room. With a voice like silk and gravel, he lays out the brutal mathematics of her demise. In 6 hours, the stalker sells her out to the wolves. In 8 hours, she ceases to exist entirely, unless she accepts his protection. The sick irony hangs heavy in the air. The savior extending a hand is the exact monster she should be sprinting away from. Here lies the tragic birth of the trauma bond. She offers a weak protest about taking care of herself, but the words dissolve into nothing. He maps out her fractured spirit, calculating the precise moment her knees will hit the floor. It is a bitter reality of the human heart. Sometimes our ultimate destroyers wear the comforting mask of our only salvation. We have finally reached the jagged edge of no return. He stares down at her trembling frame with the cold expertise of a man who has broken 1,000 souls, knowing exactly how many heartbeats she has left. Dropping his voice to a dangerous whisper, he reminds her of the fatal truth: she was the one who reached for him. Then, he simply dictates where she will stand. It is in this precise shadow that her mind splinters. Beneath the suffocating terror, a dark, treacherous corner of her psychology thrills at being so absolutely consumed. She loathes herself for the sensation, weeping as her own biology betrays her. The grandest tragedy of all is this: the most lethal monsters do not need to build our cages. They merely hand us the iron, and we forge the locks ourselves. Let us pause right here and look closely at Zoe. The camera lingers on her face as her entire life is silently hijacked. The most terrifying part of this frame is the absolute absence of screaming. The capo sits there, playing the megalomaniac to perfection, stealing her freedom without ever raising his voice. He calmly dictates a fabricated story about her being ill. You can physically see Zoe trying to fight back, but the sheer weight of the trauma paralyzes her throat. The room is brutally, suffocatingly quiet. And here is a simple truth you and I must understand about people like him. The most dangerous monsters in this world do not ever need to yell to make you obey. They just speak softly and let your own terror do all the heavy lifting. Look at the shadows in this scene as Zoe asks where they are going. Her voice is nothing more than a shattered, humiliating whisper. She steps into the car simply because a narcissist spent 5 seconds orchestrating her surrender. Giorgio sits beside her, casually checking his expensive watch as if he is waiting for a train, not actively kidnapping a woman. He drops the name of a location where her boss cannot possibly reach them. It takes a full city block for Zoe to process what he just said, and another block for the pure horror to wash over her face. She never once mentioned her boss's last name, yet Giorgio already knew it. The hard lesson we can take from this is chilling. Silence will never protect you from the predators who already live comfortably in the dark. Notice the framing of Giorgio sitting there, his hand resting casually on his knee. He stares out at the Paris streets as if he owns the pavement and every soul walking on it. Zoe asks no more questions. It is heartbreaking to witness her body language. She regresses into a frightened 15-year-old girl, burying her panic deep inside. Her brain begs her to pack the trauma away just to survive the ride. The car rolls into a massive underground bunker, and Vincenzo opens her door. It looks like a polite gesture, but it is actually a leash snapping tight. She follows them into a private elevator that shoots up to his penthouse as the iron gate slams shut behind them. The life lesson here is undeniable. Politeness from a captor is nothing but a velvet-lined trap. The second those heavy elevator doors slide open, the vast penthouse simply swallows her alive. The acoustics in this space are truly terrifying. It is a suffocating kind of silence where, if you were to scream, the expensive walls would just absorb the sound. Giorgio sheds his coat with a sickeningly normal domestic rhythm, acting as if they are merely a married couple returning home. He points to a bedroom, instructing her to ask Vincenzo for whatever she needs. When she nervously questions what would happen if she tries to sneak out, his face does not shift in anger. He just gives her the cold, infinitely patient stare of a prison warden. The lesson we find here is deeply unsettling. True monsters do not lose their temper. They just calmly promise you a nightmare. The camera follows Zoe as she walks into her assigned room, perching on the edge of that massive bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Notice what she refuses to do in this moment. She does not shed a single tear. Crying is a luxury reserved for those who are safe, and she knows there are no locks on her door. Sleep is completely out of the question tonight. Her nervous system is utterly fried, locked into a harsh survival mode. Instead, she spends her first night listening to the breathing of the house. She times Vincenzo's heavy boots patrolling the hallway every 40 minutes. By 2 a.m, she maps out every distant sound. The brutal lesson here is clear. When your safety is violently ripped away, your brain will turn your own fear into a weapon just to keep you breathing. This sequence is painful to watch. It is only the second morning, and the trauma bonding is already sinking its teeth into her mind. She discovers fresh coffee and a handwritten note from him on the counter, warning her not to open the door for anyone. His penmanship is elegant, completely masking the ruthless psychopath underneath. What is her reaction? She carefully folds the note and hides it in her pocket. In this dark moment, that small piece of paper is the only physical proof she still exists. It is a bitter truth to accept, but here is the life lesson. Sometimes, when a person is pushed to the absolute edge of despair, they will cling to the hand that locked the cage, just to feel a human pulse. That night, she cracks her door open, and Vincenzo is already waiting. The shadows lengthen as Vincenzo slowly looks up from his Italian newspaper. He does not offer a single word, because when you hold all the power, shouting is unnecessary. His dead stare communicates everything. She can walk out, but he will follow, and Giorgio will know. Defeated, she shuts the door and retreats to her room. She pulls a tiny notebook from her bag. Once used for harmless memories, it has now become her desperate survival manual. She begins charting out the blind spots and hallway lengths. The saddest part of this visual is the lesson it leaves us with. She is not planning a cinematic escape. When the walls close in on us, our very first instinct is usually just learning how to survive inside the cage. It is day 3, and Vittorio steps into the frame, bearing unexpected gifts. You and I need to pause and unpack this psychological trap together. He hands her expensive shopping bags, yet he never orders her to wear the garments. A common thug would simply yell at her to put them on. But Vittorio is playing a masterful game of chess. He casually mentions her own clothes will not last the week, twisting his absolute control to sound like a practical favor. And Luca? She is already studying his expression, the way she used to study antique books, reading his moods just to stay safe. The life lesson here is one we all need to remember. When someone truly wants to own your life, the trap never looks like a rusty iron cage. It usually looks exactly like a perfectly tailored safety net. The tension peaks when Luca finally asks when this nightmare will end. Vittorio does not raise his voice. He flatly states that it ends only when he decides it ends. He delivers the line not like a theatrical villain, but like a man reading the morning weather report. Left alone, She opens the bags to find no pretty dresses. Practical, dark clothing designed to let her move quietly. The visual message is painfully clear. She is not a trophy on a shelf. She is a pet learning to survive his penthouse. The cavernous size of the place is driving her mad. She memorizes how the sunlight crawls across the rug just to feel grounded. The lesson here is absolute. You can dress a prison up in imported marble and fine leather, but a cage is still a cage if you cannot walk out the front door. Through the lens, you can feel Luca's frantic hypervigilance crawling out of the screen. Those towering ceilings reduce her to a ghost, making the massive windows feel like a cruel joke. The opulent library feels as sterile as a hospital waiting room, reeking of harsh cleaners and cold leather. She looks like a discarded coat shoved into the back of a closet. But human beings are incredibly stubborn creatures. Stripped of her freedom, she decides to control the math. She tracks every single movement Vincenzo makes. 40 minutes on the dot, every single time, logged diligently into her notebook. The life lesson here reveals the raw power of the mind. Strip a person of their basic freedom, and their brain will instantly turn pure terror into cold, calculated data just to survive. Watch the subtle shift in her posture as Luca tries to play the game herself. She dials her boss, Madame Aurelie, forcing a raspy cough to sell the illusion of a severe flu, but listen closely to the heavy silence on the other end of the line. Aurelie is a fiercely sharp woman who instantly recognizes this sick story is complete garbage. She fires back a dark, sarcastic joke about the flu preferring luxury hotels, yet she intentionally does not push for the real truth. It is a brutally quiet moment of missed connection. And the life lesson here hits right in the chest. We always like to think our clever little lies are protecting the people we care about. But the bitter truth is, those very same lies are usually just the heavy bricks we use to seal ourselves inside our own solitary confinement. The camera holds on Luca's trembling hand. Madame Aurelie does not pry. Instead, she simply tells Luca to drink water and come back in one piece. It is her quiet way of saying, I know you are in deep trouble, so just survive. Luca hangs up fast before the tears can fall. Then, watch her next move carefully. She refuses to let the maids into her space. She washes her only shirt in the bathroom sink, hanging it over the heated rack. To an outsider, it seems totally pointless, but it is actually a beautiful, desperate survival reflex. She has lost her entire world, so she claims ownership of the sink. It is the saddest kind of victory. The lesson here is universally true. When someone rips away your power over the big things, you will fight to the death to control the tiny things. Just to remind yourself, you are human. The lighting shifts as Vittorio shows up unannounced. You can physically see Luca's heart drop. She is sitting barefoot on the floor, pretending to read just to hide how terrified she is. Vincenzo locks down the hallway, and Vittorio steps into her space, holding a small box tied with a dark ribbon. He looks exhausted, suit jacket open, sleeves rolled up as if he just finished burying a body. He whispers a simple good evening. And Luca, she actually fires back, sarcastically calling him by his formal Mafia rank. Vittorio just stops and smiles at her foolish defiance, ordering her to open the damn box. Here is the final, bitter lesson of this sequence. Sarcasm is never true bravery. When we are backed into a dark corner with zero power, we just use sharp words to pretend we still have teeth. Let us pause the frame, you and I, and look closely at this devastating dynamic. Luca believes she holds power, asking if this rare manuscript is a gift or an order. But watch the shadows shift across Vittorio's face. His voice drops, wrapping around the word request like a velvet noose. Inside that paper is the exact text she whispered the name of days ago. He did not just hear her, he catalogued her soul. The camera lingers on his eyes. There is no romantic warmth, only the cold patience of a hunter watching a steel trap snap shut on bone. It is beautifully, tragically twisted. Here is a brutal truth to remember. When someone hands you exactly what you have always dreamed of, you must always ask what piece of your soul it will cost to keep it. It is agonizing to watch this scene unfold. Luca attempts to regain control, her voice trembling slightly, as she compares this lethal man to the pretentious art snobs back at her gallery. She dares to ask if he buys off every woman he kisses with an antique book, believing she has drawn an uncrossable line in the sand. But look at the dangerous shift in Vittorio's jaw. A ghost of a smirk dances on his lips. He leans closer, pulling every ounce of oxygen out of her lungs. She thought she was building a fortress, but she just handed him the blueprint to dismantle her. We all must learn this painful lesson eventually. Throwing fake bravery in the face of a true predator does not scare them away. It only serves to season the meat before the slaughter. This is the frame where cinematic irony shatters your heart. Vittorio gestures slowly toward her chest. She verbally rejects his offering, yet her fingers curl around that leather spine like a desperate mother protecting a child. She whispers his call excuses, claiming it is purely literature. He allows her that fragile illusion, knowing it cements the cage. Then, the lighting cools. He calmly instructs her to wear a black dress, dropping the name Marchetti into the quiet room. He spins a terrifying narrative of a rival syndicate, hunting her down, deliberately manufacturing a crisis. The tragedy holds a devastating lesson, shared trauma, even when entirely fabricated by the architect of your pain, binds your soul to theirs much faster than joy ever could. Notice how the manipulation turns devastating here. His voice is barely a whisper as he tells Luca the city is watching. She must play his property to survive. Hurt, she spits back that she is nothing but scenery. The camera pushes in as he softly corrects her, calling her his shield. It is a masterpiece of psychological warfare, making her feel profoundly valuable, while masking the brutal reality that shields are forged strictly to take damage. She swallows her pride, donning the dark dress and keeping her crooked glasses as a tiny badge of defiance. He simply watches the skyline, perfectly still. The lesson here is deeply chilling. The quietest person in the room is always the one you should fear most. They do not need to bark when they already own the cage. Step into this penthouse scene with me and feel the suffocating atmosphere. Vittorio radiates a terrifying stillness, a weight carried only by men who turn violence into art. Luca says she is ready, but Vittorio deliberately waits one agonizing beat before looking at her. It is a sickening tactic, training her subconscious to beg for his gaze. They descend into an armored vehicle, gliding through streets emptied by syndicate wealth. They arrive at a sterile restaurant to face the Marchetti matriarch, whose fingers are weighed down by antique blood money. Luca has no idea she has just stepped onto a fatal chessboard. Remember this crucial truth: the moment you enter someone else's carefully rigged game, you cease to be a human being and simply become a pawn. The camera tightens as the old matriarch instantly goes for the throat. She switches languages, mid-sentence, a calculated test to fracture Luca's composure. Yet Luca holds her ground, fighting to project competence. This is the underlying tragedy beneath her fear. She is desperately trying to make Vittorio proud. Beside them sits Tommaso, whose ancient eyes catalog every micro-expression. Vittorio planted this paranoia about him earlier. Tommaso leans forward, playing the fragile grandfather, rolling the syllables of Luca's name around his mouth, pretending his hearing is failing. Do not let the soft lighting fool you. The lesson is written in blood. We often mistake manners for kindness. But in a predator's world, politeness is merely a disguised lockpick. Tommaso performs the frail old man routine flawlessly. But watch the subtle terror in Luca's eyes. Before she answers, her gaze darts toward Vittorio. She registers his knuckles turning white around a wine glass, and her own shoulders instantly lock. She has completely synced her heartbeat or captures her approval. Softly, she repeats her name, treating Tommaso like a confused elder. Suddenly, the matriarch laughs, shattering the icy tension, and asks Luca about manuscript restoration. A genuine, radiant smile breaks across Luca's face. She finally feels safely anchored in her passion. It is agonizing to witness. The devastating life lesson is clear. Humans are so starved to be understood that we will happily laugh and bond with the very monsters preparing our slaughter. Let us appreciate the dark irony unfolding at this dinner table. Luca snatches a linen napkin, moving with frantic passion to demonstrate ancient stitching techniques. She holds the city's most ruthless woman spellbound with tales of copper pigments. But she is hopelessly blind to the steel jaws closing around her. The camera pans to Vittorio. He has stopped eating, coldly calculating the exact financial leverage her brilliant mind can provide him. Beside him, Tommaso silently files away her every vulnerability. She genuinely believes she is winning this battle. The absolute hardest truth you will ever learn is this: the exact moment you finally let your guard down and feel safe in a predator's house is the very second they figure out exactly how to break you. Deep within her mind, the sirens are wailing, but Luca desperately smothers the sound. She realizes she never mentioned her university at that table. Yet, when the matriarch brought it up, Vittorio's face remained carved from stone. He showed no surprise, having already exhumed every ghost of her past before they even met. The ride back is smothered in a heavy silence. Finally, Vittorio turns and tosses her a calculated crumb of validation, telling her she did well. The physical relief that washes over her is heartbreaking. She is utterly oblivious to the nightmare she is drowning in. It leaves us with a bitter lesson, sometimes. The very people who step up to shield us from the wolves are simply wolves themselves, draped in a beautifully tailored suit. The psychological game now turns physical. Inside the dark car, the camera focuses on their hands. Vittorio lets his knuckles barely graze hers. Luca's heart hammers, but she frantically lies to herself, blaming a bump in the road. She ignores the terrifying reality that a man of his precision does nothing by accident. Standing at her bedroom door, the tension peaks. He reaches up, his skin stopping a millimeter from her trembling cheek. He lets that electric anticipation flood her nervous system, then simply turns his back. He leaves her starving in the dark. She collapses against the closed door, gasping for air, horrified to realize she wanted him to enter. The lesson is terrifying. The most inescapable prisons are never built with iron bars, but with our own desperate desires. The cruelest twist is that the syndicate no longer terrifies Luca. Her own cravings do. A week dissolves inside his golden cage. Sunday arrives in soft light. Vittorio steps onto the balcony, shedding his lethal armor for a simple white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. It is a flawlessly manufactured display of vulnerability. He stands close enough to invite intimacy, yet far enough away to deny it. In this horrific paradox, he becomes her only sanctuary within the very nightmare he orchestrated. Here is a life lesson: we must all wake up to the true monsters of this world. Rarely kick down your door bearing fangs. Most often, they arrive with rolled-up sleeves, leaning softly on a sunlit balcony, waiting patiently for you to willingly step into their open jaws. Let us unpack this devastating climax together. Vittorio leans against the railing, asking about her mother, deliberately dropping the word Philadelphia into the air. Luca's blood freezes. She knows she never told him where she was raised. Yet her fractured mind scrambles to protect the illusion of safety, convincing herself she must have let it slip. The alternative is too horrifying to survive. And then she shatters. Weeping, she hands him the keys to her soul, detailing her father's fatal crash and her mother's broken heart. By surrendering her deepest agonies, she fastens her own psychological handcuffs. It brings us to the most tragic life lesson of all. In our desperate search for a safe place to land, we will often hand our sharpest knives directly to our own executioners. We need to freeze the frame right here, because this is a haunting display of psychological control. Vittorio offers no words of comfort, no cheap apologies. Instead, he uses a suffocating silence designed to make Luca spill her darkest secrets. She bleeds out her grief, recounting her mother's shattered dreams of the Amalfi Coast and that lonely white chapel in Ravello. By silently absorbing her tragedy, Vittorio transforms himself into the soul vault for her pain. A master of manipulations does not need to raise his voice to own your soul. He simply listens. Here is the tragic lesson for you and me. True empathy helps carry the crushing weight of your sorrow. But weaponized silence only measures the depth of your wounds to see exactly where the blade will slide in easiest. Let the camera pan over to Zoe. She sits still, eyes locked on Giorgio, the man who holds her fragile future in his hands. You think the world is vast until you are trapped inside the gravity of a man like him. The dim light catches the sharp, unrelenting tension in his jaw, a physical reflection of his hidden criminal empire. Then, in a flash of calculated warmth, the monster vanishes. He drops his shoulders, flashes a flawless sideways smile, and plays the charming savior. "Drink your tea," he murmurs, and she obeys completely. He steps onto the balcony while the Paris sky burns a violent pink behind the glass. You are watching a man wound so tight he might suddenly shatter. The ultimate tragedy of human nature is how eagerly we surrender to the monsters who smile gently at us. Zoe completely misreads the room. She assumes Giorgio is just exhausted, blind to the fact that she is a pawn on his chessboard. Night falls, and she eats dinner in hollow isolation, while he locks himself away with Vincenzo. It is a tactic meant to make her feel small. She retreats to bed early, desperate to bury the ghost of Bastian, the man who previously broke her. But trauma refuses to fade in the dark. She wakes up tearing at the sheets, scream caught in her throat. In her nightmare, Bastian is standing inside her apartment. Her heart hammers violently against her ribs. Before the panic can fully set in, the bedroom door cracks open. Giorgio speaks from the pitch-black corridor. The saddest truth is trading one nightmare for another. Believing the new shadow will keep you safe. Company or silence, he asks, his voice scraping against the quiet. Stick with me, because this is the exact frame where the psychological trap snaps shut. By giving her the illusion of a choice, he creates a foundation of false safety. She swallows hard in the gloom, realizing he is waiting for her permission. Silence, she whispers. The door clicks shut, but the lock never turns. She lies there wide awake. Hours later, she creeps across the freezing floorboards and presses her ear to the wood. He is still out there. She hears the slow, rhythmic breathing of a dangerous man guarding her door without demanding a reward. She walks back to her bed, falling completely into his hands. It is a tragic reality. The second a monster offers a shield, the victim begins writing a twisted romance just to survive the dark. Morning light cuts through the curtains, bringing the brutal reality into focus. She opens her door and nearly steps on a fresh glass of water. Beside it rests a perfectly folded white handkerchief. This is not a romantic gesture. It is the chilling proof of an apex predator predicting her exact emotional collapse. She stands frozen, paralyzed as an aching pressure builds behind her eyes. She mutters out loud that ruthless mobsters do not leave water because they care. They do it to protect their valuable investments. She repeats this 3 times to anchor her slipping sanity, but the awful truth bleeds through. She does not believe her own lie. The hardest lesson we ever learn is that sometimes the only hand treating you with gentleness belongs to the person engineering your destruction. She wanders into the dim library, catching Giorgio changing his shirt. She freezes, eyes locked onto a massive, jagged scar ripping across his left shoulder. This is not the clean work of a surgeon. This is a brutal bullet wound stitched together in some dark basement. Giorgio turns to face her, radiating a chilling, absolute calm. He knows exactly what holds her gaze. She stammers an apology, but he waves it away, buttoning his shirt with the quiet precision of a killer. Before she can stop herself, she asks what happened. He does not even blink. Another life, he replies, burying his violent history like ash. It is a fatal human flaw. We fall for people who hide their worst demons, convinced our love is the magic cure that will finally fix them. Giorgio executes an agonizing pause, staring her down over the rims of his reading glasses. For a second, she feels a twisted urge to laugh, because they both wear crooked frames, but the humor dies in the cold air. Just that, he repeats, his voice dropping into a dark register. Zoe refuses to back away, knowing that stepping back means total surrender. She meets his eyes and declares she is returning to work for Madame Aurieli on a manuscript. You will go with Vincenzo, he fires back like a whip. She argues she can repair old books without a bodyguard. Giorgio's face turns to stone, his tone dead flat. I know. But you are not leaving without him. It is a tragic scene. She believes she is fighting for her independence, blind to the fact that she is already negotiating the terms of her own cage. She is trapped 2 feet away, pinned between his imposing frame and the towering bookshelves. His physical presence is suffocating. He executes a slow, predatory scan of her face. His dark gaze checks her glasses, drops to her parted lips, and locks onto her eyes. Very well, she whispers, surrendering to his demand. Nobody moves. The library falls so quiet you can hear his steady breaths, smelling of sharp bergamot and cold wealth. Then, with agonizing slowness, his right hand rises. He does not even touch her skin. He simply hovers his thumb in the empty air, tracing the fragile's curve of her jawline. The most terrifying display of control is not a violent grip. It is the haunting promise that a monster can break you whenever they desire, but chooses to leave you waiting in the dark. She tilts her head up. It is not a choice, but the tragic image of her body giving up the fight. He closes the gap, resting his heavy forehead against hers for 3 agonizing seconds. His breath hits her trembling lip, a moment of sheer torture. His hand grips her waist over her clothes, not to enforce dominance, but to keep her from collapsing. Her breathing spirals into chaos. He shuts his eyes and whispers roughly in Italian. She only recognizes a single word. Perdona. Forgive me. Then he steps away. Just one tiny shift, but the emotional iron wall slams right back down between them. Vincenzo will take you Wednesday, he orders softly. 7 in the morning. This is the cruelty of a manipulator. They pull you close enough to feel art beat, only to leave you freezing in the aftermath. She bolts from the library before her nervous system shuts down. She storms down the hallway, slams her bedroom door, and presses her forehead against the wood. She screams at herself in her mind, fighting off the delusion of romance. He does not want you. She repeats like a broken prayer. He is protecting a valuable asset. It is strictly business. Cold-blooded predators do not fall in love with girls like you. She repeats it, clawing at her sanity, but she is already too far gone. Then, she hears a low sound vibrating through the door. It is Giorgio. He is breathing right on the other side, leaning his weight against her only line of defense. We can lie to our fragile brains all day, but when the monster is waiting outside your door, your traitorous heart is always the first thing to surrender. Zoe knows he is out there in the dark. She does not need to see his shadow to feel his crushing presence. She watches the heavy brass doorknob shake just a fraction of an inch. Twice. It moves solely from the pressure of his thumb against the metal, but he never turns it. He simply stands there, executing this terrifying psychological siege for an eternity. Finally, the tension breaks. The rhythmic thud of his boots slowly fades down the corridor. She is too paralyzed to open the door and check if he is gone. Wednesday arrives under a bleak gray sky. 2 agonizing days have passed, and they have been avoiding each other like ghosts. She sits awake before dawn, clutching her notebook. The quietest moments in a house built on violence are always the absolute loudest, echoing with every word they refuse to say. Stick with me, because you and I need to decode what her erratic actions truly mean. Zoe is spiraling into panic. She paces the floor, timing the armed security guards out the window 3 separate times to find a blind spot. She frantically scribbles an escape plan in tiny letters. Paranoid, she is losing her mind to this dark romance. The shrill ring of the phone shatters the quiet. It is Madame Aurieli, sounding exhausted, begging for her help to appraise a rare French book. For the love you have for books, the frail woman pleads. Zoe hangs up, knowing she has to go. But she is not running out that door for the love of old paper. She is fleeing the dangerous, sickening attachment she is forming with a monster. Sometimes, as tragic as it is, we run headfirst into the burning fire just to escape the terrifying comfort of the dark. Picture the opening frame of a heavy psychological thriller. The lighting is low, catching the damp skin of the man, fresh from the shower. He stands there, coat unfastened, consuming the space with that terrifying, quiet gravity of a true narcissist. She catches his reflection in the glass, and instantly her own identity fractures. You and I have felt that, haven't we? That suffocating weight when someone steals all the air in the room. She mentions the Lisbon collector, a job she knows will anger him, but he just watches the rain streak the window. The silence stretches, loaded and lethal. We so often hold our breath for those who would happily watch us drown. Remember this: never let a monster's storm decide the weather in your own soul. Let the camera slowly pan to the street, framing the illusion of safety. Vincenzo finally speaks, his voice flat and heavy like a Sicilian general drawing battle lines. The car stays at the curb, return before the streetlights turn on. She tries to assert herself, reminding him she is a grown woman, but he cuts her down with a freezing, dead-eyed stare. You are my responsibility, he tells her. It sounds like salvation, but watch the subtle tightening of her jaw. He is just forging the bars of a prettier cage. She snatches her bag and hurries to the workshop, inhaling the scent of decaying paper and bitter tea, just to feel alive again. But here is the tragedy of her situation. A golden cage is still a prison, and freedom is just a ghost if you still have to beg for it. Outside the faded brick of the bookstore, the tension ratchets up a notch. Vincenzo is pacing, radiating pure mob paranoia. He parks the heavy car facing the intersection, his eyes scanning reflections in the glass, murmuring sharp Italian into his phone. Then, the camera lingers on the alley. Ablaxa sits idling in the shadows. Any rational person would freeze, but watch her psychological defense mechanism kick in. She forces her eyes away, pretending it is merely a coincidence. We all do this, don't we? We paint over the red flags because acknowledging the monster means our safe little world is shattered. But ignoring the shadow in the alley does not make the predator disappear. When your intuition screams that the dark is dangerous, you must listen. Notice how she completely buries herself in denial. The menacing car outside becomes just another piece of Paris traffic in her mind. She steps into the muted, dusty sanctuary of the bookshop, wrapping herself in the mundane. Aurelie is behind the counter, complaining about a sore throat. Grounding the scene in agonizing normalcy, the camera pushes in close as our girl traces the fragile, cracked spine of an old Portuguese manuscript. Her fingers move on sheer muscle memory, building a fragile fortress out of ink and parchment, while a storm gathers on her doorstep. It is a brilliant, tragic shot. We all use our daily habits as a shield against the things that terrify us, but busyness is a paper wall, and it will never stop the reality waiting right outside your door. For just one agonizingly beautiful beat, the tension lifts. Aurelie slides a porcelain teacup across the desk, making a dry, sarcastic comment about the hitman's expensive leather shoes on her pavement. It is the perfect comedic relief to mask the dread. The sinking sun floods the bookstore in rich, cinematic gold, tricking your brain into thinking the danger has passed. Then, the deadbolt loudly snaps. Vincenzo's voice shatters the quiet, a harsh, guttural bark, demanding she get away from the glizzasass. You and I know exactly what that shift means. The golden hour is dead, replaced by the cold blue light of a nightmare. It is a brutal reminder that the safest feeling moments are often just the deep breath before you go under. Peace is sometimes just an intermission for tragedy. The camera snaps to her terrified face. She looks through the window. 3 men storm the pavement, coats sweeping back to reveal cold steel, their car trunk yawning open like a waiting grave. In a typical thriller, this is where the heroine freezes. Instead, watch her break the mold. She screams for Aurelie to bolt the iron door, turning the shop into a battleground. She throws her entire weight against a massive oak bookcase. Slowly, then all at once, 20 years of heavy, leather-bound history cascades down onto the attackers in a deafening crash. It is a stunning display of courage. When the wolves arrive at your door, playing the helpless prey guarantees your tragic end. To survive the monster, you have to become the avalanche. The frame erupts into sheer, disorienting chaos. Splintering oak, torn parchment, and shattered glass fill the air while Vincenzo barks desperate commands in Italian. Then, the horror gets intimately close. A heavy hand grips her ribs, yanking her backward by the hair. But look at the subtle shift in her expression. The fear vanishes, replaced by something ancient and feral. She channels every ounce of unresolved grief, every bitter memory of her past, and sinks her teeth into the man's wrist like a cornered animal. She tastes copper. The attacker screams, stumbling away. It is an ugly, visceral, and absolutely necessary victory. It teaches us a grim truth about the darker side of humanity. You cannot negotiate with a predator. True boundaries are carved in blood. The attacker thrashes wildly, hurling her against the cold stone floor. Her skin scrapes raw against the masonry, her glasses shattering so the lens of the camera blurs, distorting the violence around her. Through this dizzying haze, Vincenzo executes one of the men in 2 blinding, ruthless seconds. But then, the true architect of the nightmare arrives. Giorgio's sleek car tears down the narrow Parisian street, defying every law because he practically owns the asphalt. Notice his entrance. He does not run to save her. He steps out, slow and deliberate, a weapon resting at his side, carrying the chilling, inevitable gravity of a reaper. It is a haunting image. Real, terrifying power never needs to sprint. It simply takes its time, fully aware that you have absolutely nowhere to run. Now, watch closely as the director frames absolute dominance. Giorgio approaches the trembling survivor. Without a single shift in his cold expression, he grabs the man's arm and snaps it backward. The brutal, hollow crack echoes above the sirens in the distance. Giorgio crouches, his voice a flat, dead calm. In flawless French, he commands the weeping man to deliver a message to a rival named Lefra. He is turning a broken human being into a bloody, living telegram. The camera slowly pans over her shoulder, revealing the other attacker, staring blindly at the ceiling, utterly lifeless. This is the horrifying reality of the underworld we must understand. For men like Giorgio, inflicting pain is never a loss of control. It is just their native language, spoken with terrifying fluency. The most unsettling part of this sequence is the dead silence that follows. No flashing blue lights, no screaming neighbors, just a synchronized, chillingly efficient cleanup. Her body is convulsing, the adrenaline draining from her veins like water. Aurelie gathers her into the wreckage, smelling of dust and dried blood, murmuring soft words of survival. In the background, Giorgio and Vincenzo speak in low, casual Italian, as if discussing the weather. Then the boss approaches. He reaches out, his face an unreadable marble mask, and gently brushes the blood from her bruised lip. You and I need to recognize this exact moment. This is the genesis of a psychological trap. We let the devil play the savior, mistakenly trading a fleeting second of mercy for the chains of a trauma bond. Focus now on the absolute iron will of Aurelie. This weary shop owner refuses to crumble into useless hysterics. She looks past the shattered glass and the trembling girl, staring right into her core, and asks a single question. Did you bite him? When the girl nods, a silent pact forms between them. She has teeth. She will survive. Aurelie then slowly turns her attention to the Mafia kingpin. Giorgio stands amid the ruin, his expensive suit stained, radiating the suppressed violence of a coiled snake. Yet, the old woman does not even blink. The two of them lock eyes in a profound, wordless war for dominance. It is a stunning visual metaphor. The most dangerous presence in a room is almost never the one holding the gun. It is the one who stands perfectly still while the world burns. Aurelie is entirely immune to the magnetic gravity of this criminal. With the steady tone she would use to scold a careless student, she demands to know if he brought this violent chaos to her sanctuary. Giorgio remains silent, a grim confirmation in the shadows. Aurelie issues a veiled threat of her own, firmly ordering him to tend to the girl's wounds. Astonishingly, the untouchable kingpin blinks. He yields to her authority, commanding his men back to the street. The scene cuts sharply to the sterile, freezing isolation of his penthouse. Our girl sits there, trembling uncontrollably beneath the expensive lights. It is a devastating biological reality. You can lock the heavy doors and hide behind millions, but your body never forgets the terror of the dark. In the suffocating quiet of the apartment, she sits detached, staring at her shaking hands as if they belong to a stranger. Giorgio dismisses his guards, sealing them inside this glass vault. He approaches with the careful grace of a predator, sinking to his knees in a flawless display of manufactured vulnerability. The camera pushes in close for the climax. But here is the magnificent twist. She does not break. Instead of falling into his arms seeking comfort, she visibly recoils, pressing her spine deep into the leather sofa to escape his touch. The polite facade shatters. She looks him dead in the eye and tells him he is not a good man. You and I must celebrate this victory. The exact second you stop accepting a monster's fake apology is the moment you reclaim your soul. Let us look closely at this frame. The shadows stretch sharp, cutting across her trembling shoulders as she throws the raw truth into his face. She forces him to recall the sickening crack of that snapping bone, refusing to let him paint his brutality as some dark romance. She lays bare 10 years of surviving pure hell. Her night terrors taught her the language of violence perfectly. But Giorgio does not even blink. He weaponizes his own surrender. He stays on his knees, his voice an eerie calm, swearing to remain anchored to the floor until she commands him to rise. Giving someone a fake sense of power is merely a way to lock a psychological cage from the inside. The hardest lesson we can ever learn is that sometimes the most deadly traps look exactly like wide-open doors. The camera lingers on her hands. Her mind is tearing itself apart. Minutes ago, those fingers possessed the strength to draw blood from a killer. Now, they shake looking down at a powerful man playing the role of the weak. Her rage twists into something far more fatal. She whispers a breathless word for him to stay. Giorgio remains frozen on the carpet, his tailored suit stained with the crimson of his true nature. Slowly, he removes her shattered glasses, forcing her to meet his eyes without a shield. Then, he asks if he can touch her. You and I must recognize a brutal truth. The second a monster stops demanding and starts asking for permission, we drop our swords. False respect disarms us faster than any weapon. The tragedy unfolds exactly as we fear. She gives him consent without putting up a fight. It is heartbreaking to watch her shoulders cave, but no one could blame her. When you spend your life flinching from a fist, a gentle hand feels like a miracle, even if it just finished tearing someone else apart. She offers a slow nod, and in that agonizing split second, the dark power dynamic between them is cast in stone. He did not breach her walls by force. He merely waited until she willingly handed over the keys. This paints a devastating picture of human frailty. The simplest life lesson here is that extreme emotional exhaustion forces us to settle for anything that faintly resembles peace, regardless of how deeply toxic the actual source of that comfort might be. Stick with me as the camera focuses on Zoe's fractured psyche. She stares at Giorgio, kneeling on the floorboards, while another man's blood soaks his silk sleeve. He offers a crafted apology, playing the vulnerable card with cinematic perfection. Zoe replies with an empty voice, listing the agonizing years her life was shattered. Her former abuser never needed fists, torturing her mind every day instead. Yet, she looks at Giorgio and admits the terrifying truth. No man has ever used violence to protect her before. Right there, the dark roots of a trauma bond take hold. She realizes violence is usually reserved to crush the weak. It is a harsh, tragic reminder that our deepest unhealed wounds leave us utterly desperate for a protector, even a lethal predator. Zoe reaches out, pressing trembling fingers against his wrist. His steady pulse is a terrifying detail, proving how ordinary this chaos is to him. Her mind already spins excuses for his brutality, convincing her battered soul the bloodshed was a twisted form of chivalry. We are watching a victim paint a predator as a savior. Giorgio murmurs that she owes him nothing, an insidious trick, ensuring she feels indebted forever. She surrenders, resting her forehead against his until their breathing aligns. His hand wraps around the nape of her neck, quietly claiming his territory. She inhales his scent of fresh linen, burying herself in the dark illusion. A vital life lesson echoes here. We dangerously confuse the temporary absence of pain with genuine safety. Notice how the massive penthouse suddenly shrinks into a suffocating box. The psychological trap finally snaps shut around her mind. Giorgio speaks first, expertly using her hesitation. He claims she deserves to know who he really is, dressing his dark confession as pure emotional vulnerability. Still kneeling, he uses physical surrender to hide that he pulls every string. He drops the bomb in a quiet voice, admitting he has run a ruthless crime family since 28. He feeds her calculated truths to keep her blind to the terrifying bigger picture. By pointing out her shaking hands, he plays the merciful king offering grace. The final lesson of this tragedy is simple. Manipulators will always offer a warm, comforting lie in exchange for stealing your bitter truth. Let us pause on this frame, because we are watching the exact moment the trap snaps shut. Giorgio invents a new danger just to play the savior, swearing on his scar to protect her. It is pure theater, meant to break her independence. When Zoe asks why he cares, her voice trembles, aching for warmth. He flashes a cold smirk and says, "It is because she threw herself at his mercy." Her spirit is so battered she misses the danger, turning his cruelty into something holy, like a vow spoken in a dark cathedral. It is agonizing to witness. But maybe that is the hardest truth we all have to learn about the human heart. When a person is truly starving for just one drop of safety, they will stare directly at the iron bars of a cage and convince themselves it is a loving embrace. Watch the body language here. She reaches out to him first, driven by a tragic urge to keep the monster pacified. He takes her hand with a terrifying finality, sealing their silent bargain. Standing in the shadows, she cups his face. She feels the rough stubble on his jaw against the freezing wind, resting her forehead against his. In that single breath, the natural fear that kept her alive simply washes away. She whispers that she knows he is lying, but her tone is completely hollow. Giorgio closes his eyes, a mask of stone. She stares at his dark lashes, using his beauty to excuse the killer hiding beneath the skin. It reminds us of a bitter reality. People will almost always choose a beautiful, comforting lie over a terrifying truth. By admitting she rejects the truth, Zoe hands him the nails to build her own cage. It is a twisted survival instinct. Giorgio exhales a shaky breath, faking weakness so she feels needed. But when he leans in to kiss her, look closely. There is no warmth. It is slow, cold, and calculated to break her down. Watch his hand move right to the back of her neck. It mirrors affection, but it is pure ownership. He strokes her cheek, mapping out exactly how much ground she has surrendered. And she allows it, silently giving him permission to take everything. It leaves us with a grim lesson about manipulation. The most effective way to control someone is to make them truly believe they were the ones who chose to hand over the keys. Watch the exact frame where her freedom shatters. The camera pushes in as Giorgio pulls back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. She has no glasses to hide behind anymore. He whispers for her to follow him. Just one quiet command. Her hand trembles as it slips into his. He guides her down the very hallway she spent weeks pacing, measuring, trying to control. Now she surrenders every inch. The thud of his shoulder hitting the light switch plunges the shot into blackness. A harsh cut to morning, where soft Paris sunlight washes over white sheets, painting an illusion of peace over an irreversible tragedy. We all do this in our darkest moments. The hardest truth to accept is that our own minds will eagerly decorate the walls of a cage, just to avoid admitting we are finally trapped. The lens finds Zoe waking up, the morning light heavy and cold. The room is permanently stained by his presence, his dark shirt draped over a chair, her glasses folded on the nightstand with an eerie, calculated precision. Muffled through the thick plaster, his low voice snaps brutal orders in Italian, a sharp audio cue that she is resting in a killer's den. And yet, a slow, tragic smile breaks across her lips. For the first time in a decade, she slept through the night. By surrendering to the biggest monster in the room, her exhausted nerves finally felt entirely safe. It reveals a highly uncomfortable truth about human nature. A broken soul will willingly wrap its arms around the devil, if it means they can finally stop running from their own haunting shadows. Watch her body language in this frame. Zoe draws a shallow breath, shrinking into the posture of the little girl who lost her father. That unhealed grief makes her the perfect mark for a false savior. She rubs her arms, trying to anchor herself. Then, without a single creak, the bedroom door swings open. Giorgio walks in, holding steaming coffee. He looks like a romantic led dark trousers, a loose white shirt, hair dripping wet. It is a flawless cinematic disguise, using domestic warmth to wash away his violent history. We must never forget this simple lesson. True danger rarely announces itself with loud footsteps or obvious threats. More often than not, it walks right into your life, offering a gentle smile and a warm cup of coffee. Let's freeze the frame right here and study Giorgio in that shadowy doorway. The dim morning light catches his face as he plays the ultimate megalomaniac, making Zoe feel perfectly chosen. He hands her the coffee, steaming in the cool air, crafted with terrifying precision, the exact ratio of cream she orders at her local bakery. When she asks how he knew, his calm admission should terrify her. He watched her for days, memorizing her life. If you or I heard that, we would run. Yet, Zoe just smiles, sipping the warm poison, sealing herself inside his beautiful trap. Here is the tragic truth we must carry with us. Obsession loves to disguise itself as profound devotion, and we rarely see the wolf until we are already locked in the cage. Notice the camera lingering on the rare book resting between them on the bed. It is a physical apology, a heavy anchor of manipulation she accepts like a sacred gift. It is agonizing to watch him smoothly overwrite her reality. In a low velvet murmur, he mentions erasing her schedule, and she blindly surrenders her freedom. The lighting shifts as he brings up Bastian, claiming he neutralized the threat. He spins a dark fairy tale of being her noble shield, hiding the sickening fact that he is the true monster. The ultimate tragedy is the devotion in her eyes as she believes him. We must learn from this quiet horror. When a soul is starved for safety, they will happily warm their hands on the very fire that is burning their entire life to the ground. Giorgio whispers for her to rest, pulling the strings of this twisted tragedy. Seeking a breath of normal air, Zoe attempts a fragile joke about avoiding marriage, desperately trying to cut the suffocating tension. Giorgio offers a shadow-soaked smile, humoring her while maintaining absolute dominance. He agrees to hold off on marriage, granting the pathetic illusion that she still has boundaries. His voice is smooth glass, as he claims he only makes small promises because he keeps them. It is a terrifying masterclass in fake humility. Drowning in this manufactured safety, she leans forward to kiss his shoulder. A haunting life lesson echoes in this silent room. Trust, built in the shadow of complete terror, is never really trust at all. It is just a desperate heart doing whatever it takes to survive the night. He rests his chin against her hair, breathing her in as if he owns the air she exhales. The scene cuts to the freezing marble of the penthouse kitchen. Zoe wanders in wearing his oversized dress shirt, entirely swallowed by his identity. Giorgio follows like a quiet predator, dropping a heavy possessive hand onto her waist. The speed of his ownership is terrifying, yet to Zoe, it feels like a warm embrace. The camera catches Vincenzo, the brutal and faint enforcer, casually reading a newspaper. The visual contrast is utterly absurd. Barefoot and delicate, Zoe is happily playing house inside a fortified Mafia compound. Let this be a painful reminder. Normalizing the abnormal is a deeply dangerous game. One that blinds your survival instincts until you are comfortably sleeping inside a tiger cage. Let's pan across this dangerous room. Vincenzo lifts his gaze, his face a dead-eyed mask. He addresses Giorgio formally as the Dawn, a chilling reminder of the blood on their hands. Giorgio fires back in rapid Italian, sounding perfectly relaxed. Zoe understands nothing, yet she happily soaks in the golden morning light. Vincenzo shoots her a microscopic smile, wishes her a good morning in French, and gestures to the fresh bread. Then comes a sound that breaks your heart. Zoe actually laughs. It is a breathless, genuine sound of pure joy. She is entirely assimilated, finding true comfort among men who could destroy her in a heartbeat. It leaves us with a haunting realization. The darkest places on Earth are fully capable of constructing the most beautiful illusions of a safe home. Watch her bathed in sunlight, sitting in this temporary sanctuary. She hugs his shirt tightly, hiding inside the monster's shadow to feel safe. Giorgio leans nearby, radiating a manufactured domestic peace. Suddenly, the camera pushes in tight on her eyes. The illusion finally cracks. Her mind flashes back to the claustrophobic elevator on their first day. Before she ever mentioned the stalker in her hallway, Giorgio had calmly spoken Bastien Lev's full name. He already knew the target. He orchestrated the entire threat. It is agonizing to watch her realize she was a pawn from the very first minute. You and I have likely felt this devastating pain. Our fragile minds will desperately bury the most terrifying warnings just to keep an exhausted heart from shattering into a million pieces. Study her silent grief right here. She lowers her coffee, her gaze burning into the side of Giorgio's face. He plays the ultimate protector flawlessly, tracing hypnotic circles on her back to cement the trauma bond. For 2 agonizing seconds, the horrifying truth that he orchestrated her misery burns on her tongue. Yet she swallows the words. We scream at the screen, begging her to run. Why does she stay quiet? Because she finally feels happy. And to a broken soul, happiness is deeply terrifying. It gives you something to lose. She locks the betrayal away in a dark mental vault. We all make this tragic mistake, choosing a beautiful lie over a brutal reality. But always remember, the human body keeps the score, and it will never truly forgive a deception. She takes that glowing red flag and buries it in the dark archives of her mind. The scene looks like domestic bliss, but beneath the surface, it is an exhausting sea of hypervigilance. Giorgio possesses the dark instincts of a veteran sociopath. He feels the microscopic shift in her breathing. Turning his head, he softly asks if everything is all right. The lighting cools. It is a lethal pop quiz, testing her loyalty. She lies directly to his face, sealing her fate by pressing a kiss to his shoulder. He rewards her submission with a gentle kiss on her hair. It is operant conditioning, executed flawlessly as the morning sun rises. This bitter scene highlights a crucial truth. Real safety can never exist in the arms of a person you must carefully manage just to survive the day. The scene fades into the agonizing second act of this psychological horror. Stick with me, because this is where the steel trap finally shatters bone. 3 weeks of manufactured peace was all it took for her to completely surrender. She drank his coffee, slept in his bed, and let him wash away her fears. She truly believed he was her savior in the dark, but hear this tragic truth. Megalomaniacs do not rescue broken people. They acquire them, locking them away like stolen art. The man she believed to be her safe harbor was the exact predator she should have fled. It breaks the heart to watch her sink so deeply into the beautiful lie. Yet it leaves us with an unforgettable revelation. The most dangerous prison in the world is the one perfectly engineered to look like a warm sanctuary. The final shattering of her reality happens when physical proof destroys her denial. A photograph slips from the rare book he gifted her. The camera pushes in on the image. It is Zoe at 16, bathed in bright graduation sunlight. But lurking in the blurred background across the street stands a younger Giorgio. The predator had been hunting his prize for years. The Italian scrawled on the back is a sickening promise of her eternal debt. Her hands turn to ice. You can feel her ribs cracking under the crushing weight of this ultimate betrayal. The romantic fairy tale instantly burns to ash, leaving only absolute terror. It delivers a deeply brutal truth. You can never truly heal your broken soul in the exact same toxic environment that caused you to bleed in the first place.
A major educational lesson in the story comes from Zoe's reaction after Giorgio violently stops the men who attack her outside Belgrade. On the surface, he protects her. He arrives quickly, defeats the men, and sends a message to Bastian. In many dramatic romances, this moment might be presented as purely heroic, but Zoe's response makes the story more mature. She is shaken because she has seen violence before and she refuses to romanticize it automatically. She tells Giorgio that she is not the kind of woman who sees a man breaking another man's arm and finds it beautiful. This is a powerful lesson. Protection can be necessary, especially in dangerous situations, but violence should never be treated as romantic just because it is done for love. Giorgio's violence may save her, but it also reminds her that he belongs to a brutal world. The fact that he can be triumphant for her does not erase the danger that he might one day use power around her or against her. Educationally, this scene teaches viewers to separate gratitude from blind trust. A person can be thankful for being protected while still questioning the protector's methods. Zoe's honesty is important because she does not let fear or attraction her moral instincts. She names what she saw. She tells him that violence has shaped her life and that she cannot simply admire it. Giorgio's apology matters because he does not dismiss her fear. He stays kneeling, listens, and asks permission before touching her wound. The lesson is balanced. Real protection should be accountable. It should not demand admiration. If someone truly cares, they must understand that even protective violence can leave you emotional marks on the person being protected.